Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott, and I'm pleased to have on the show today from North Little Rock, Arkansas. Let's say that the right way. Joe Musgrove. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ray. I appreciate you having me.
I'm glad to have you here. I got the pronunciation of your name right in the intro, and then but then I stumbled on North Little Rock. That's I guess it slipped out a little bit the wrong way, but glad to have you here on the show. Glad to be able to talk to you. Paul Cassar had turned me on to you. I believe you're a member of the HO Scale group. Is that right?
I am. Yeah, and it's a great group. Of course, he talked about that. It's a great Facebook page, and so I definitely visit that as much as I can, and got to know him and everything. He was the one that recommended your podcast, and so I went out and started listening to it. I'm thinking, man, this is great. It's a great podcast, some great model railroaders out there. So.
Yeah, that is a really good group. Well over 10,000 members. Paul has done a phenomenal job getting that group together, and very interactive. A lot of great information being shared, and now it connects us together. So it's done a great job. So we're going to talk a little bit about, quite a bit about the layout that you're building, your Missouri Pacific Railroad, Central Division. And we're going to talk about your YouTube channel that you've created, and you've sharing a lot of great information on there. So we'll talk about that, but I want to start right in the beginning. Let's talk about when Joe started to really fall in love with trains. When did that start to happen?
Oh man, gosh, I tell you, it's probably a familiar story. Just growing up as a kid, always had an interest in trains. And I think my first train set was, I got it maybe the Christmas of 1977. And this was I can't even remember, it was an HO set. I can't remember what brand it was, but it was a Burlington Northern F unit. It was a little freight set. Of course, came with the track and the buildings. And of course you had the what I call the lollipop trees and things like that, the grass mat. And that was built, my brother and my dad basically put that on. It was a 4x8 sheet of plywood, and this thing had small wheels on it. So it would go under the bed, and then when we're ready to run it, we'd bring it back out, kind of remove the dust bunnies and things like that. And that was probably the first train set that I can remember as a kid. And, the interest just really started building from there. I know, was old enough to start riding bikes with my dad and brother. We were pretty close to Missouri Pacific lines in the Little Rock, North Little Rock area. So we would go down there. So not only model railroading, of course, but just actual trains and things like that were an interest. And of course, it's like, I think a lot of people, you start getting into your teenage years and your interest in things change. And so stopped doing the model railroading and things like that for a while. But then once I got out of school and my second house, it just the interest started peaking again, and so that's when I took off from there. That was maybe 2002, I'd say.
So like in 2002, was there anything that really, can you pinpoint maybe something that really relit the fire in 02?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Obviously being out of school, all of a sudden I found myself with all this time, which is kind of strange. It was kind of like, hey, I'm not having to read or study or anything. So, I just I hadn't gone down the old Union Station, and that's in Little Rock. It's and looked around and just kind of watched the trains for a while. And I said, yeah, let's go down there. And so anyway, I just started, watching the trains and stuff, because I bring back some memories and things. So, man, I just remember that model railroading and had a really good time. And, and so I was like, I need to kind of get back in that hobby. I think I really, so that, seeing the actual trains again, and then bringing back those memories and things like that. I said, yeah, I really got to do this. So I found a hobby shop in Little Rock and started, talking to the hobby shop owner there and everything. And then I, of course, did HO's my first train set, the one I remember. And this was like, it's going to be N or HO. So I decided to go with N scale because at the time I had a 10 by 10 foot bedroom. And I thought, well, I could really, I could fit it in that area. So then I got a book on, I think it was a Calmback book on the intro to model railroading, which is kind of the basics and building your layout and things like that. And So built again, based on what I had memory. It's just that 4x8 sheet, because that's all I was really kind of exposed to. And of course the book was build your basic layout and things like that.
Right.
So, had the little N scale going and everything, and almost gave it up because it's like, I thought that was all there was. Again, it's what I grew up with as a kid, and then watching the train just go around in circles, started getting a little bit old. And so I thought, well, yeah, maybe this is not as fun as I remember it. I almost gave up on it. And so my wife and I, we like to go to some of the local bookstores and coffee shops and read. And they had a book. It was also a combat book by a model railroader. And it was line side track details. And I started thumbing through that. And then I saw it's like, okay, there's more than this 4x8 foot table in this little oval. You can do these incredible things. You can have, all this detailing and all this really cool stuff. And it was like, I was like, man, I'm just doing this wrong. I'm just doing this wrong. And got super excited about it. All of a sudden it went from this, well, it's all there is model railroading. It's this little table, which is nothing wrong with that. But for me, I just needed more. And so I started reading through this book, all the cool things you could do. The next day, that was torn out, and I put in my first around the room N scale layout, and have been going ever since. It just got bit by the bug, and away we went.
What got you? So you started with N scale. Was the decision just because of allows more space, or was there any other reason that N scale really tickled you? Or
yeah, it was of course, always had that love of Missouri Pacific, and at the time I think there was only one N scale locomotive out there. It was Missouri Pacific, and so well, I can do something else. But to answer your question, yeah, it was really just kind of the room, because I looked at HO and I'm thinking, man, that's just, that's not going to be able to have much of a layout. At least what I knew at that time. Was still kind of getting back and learning this stuff. So I said, hey, N scale is where it's at. And of course it had really, this is early 2000s. So it had kind of come into its own. It was not like it was in way back when N scale was, kind of questionable at best.
Sure.
And so that's why I went with it. And then also just reading the book on the line side track detail and all the cool things they did, like the yards, and then, hit on operations and all this stuff. I knew with N scale, I would have the size to do what I needed to do. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. And I actually went with a freelance railroad, and it was the Willoughby in West Arkansas. And again, still drawn to that area in West Arkansas, Northwest Arkansas. And it was a great railroad. Just really liked it, and it was really fun. But I kind of, two things where I kind of decided to get changed from there is one, even though it was N scale, and of course at the time it's like, man, I want to do all this stuff, and I had the track and all these industries and things like that going. And it's kind of like, be careful what you wish for, because it really almost became too much for one person to kind of manage. So it got to where it's like, well, it's like, I really need to finish this, but, it's just like, now I kind of want to operate too, but it's like it was just, I think I kind of jumped before I really looked, and it just became a little bit too much, which is, you think, well, it's N scale and a 10 by 10, but you can put a lot into that space.
Absolutely.
And, yeah. So then I was like, the Missouri Pacific bug really started, kind of coming up again, kind of real bug. And it was like, it's like, I don't know if N scale is, I loved it and everything, but, it's Missouri Pacific was calling to me. And of course, then this a few years had gone by, and, like all of us, here come the reading glasses.
Sure.
And then I was like going, it's, and that was another reason I kind of went from, N scale to HO is just as, I wanted more detail, but it was also just kind of easier to see. So I was like, if I'm going to go HO, it's going to be Missouri Pacific. And because that's the railroad I think all along I wanted to model. It kind of what I grew up with, my roots, and it was always a calling. And that's when I did the official switch to HO, and actually was able to use the same bench work. And, it was, kind of, it was kind of, 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 kind of and just created a little bitty switching layout with just a portable, kind of like a cassette, what would you call it, staging that I could just put in, and the train could run on and off of it and everything. So I made that official switch to HOs.
Yeah. So how far along was your N scale train, your HO N scale layout before you switched to HO?
Well, actually, pretty far along. Most of the track was already in. I had a fully functional yard. I think I had like 13 or 14 industries at the time. And I had a little bit of weathering and structures and things like that on the layout, and still just a very long way to go. And I think one of the things it sort of got my mind to kind of just, churning over, and it's like, okay, am I going to be able to finish this? I mean, it's just a lot to it and everything. But it was great. It's like it was great to have that fully functional yard and all these industries and things like that. It was really fun. So I'd actually finished it, was running. I think maybe I had one or two spurs left to do, but it was fully operational, of course, and certainly enjoyed it. So every now and then, it's like, well, did I make the right decision? Yeah, I made the right decision going.
I was going to ask you that, how that I've got a layout that runs. I'm able to go down and run trains when I want, but now I've got to make that big leap of, now I'm going to make a complete change where that's all going to go away, and now I've got to kind of start from basically. I mean, you, like you said, you reused your bench work, but you're basically starting over. It's a complete start over, especially with it going to a different scale.
Yeah, it really is, and of course that was, that was part of the, when you're kind of weighing options and things like that, you're kind of like, well, you are starting over, and it's certainly, you're not going to have room to do what you did in N scale. But then I started looking at some of the advantages. One of the things that I didn't get in N scale that I do in HO is the detail, and that was, and I think kind of goes back to when I was a kid. It's like a lot of kids, you build these, military models and car models and things like that. So I always like that. And then what really appealed was just the availability that you had in HO, including the Missouri Pacific, where now, of course, in scale, you can get all kind of Missouri Pacific stuff. But at that time, I think there was one locomotive, and the skills weren't there, where I could get an undecorated model and make my own Missouri Pacific locomotives, of course. But yeah, that was a thought. It's like, man, I've really got to start over. But then weighing everything, it was just, I said, no, this is definitely the right decision. And of course, good old eBay and some of these other selling sites, there's no problem selling the N scale stuff. It was kind of funny. I actually got, for a couple of days, eBay suspended my account because I went from selling a couple of items. Now I'm selling like all these items. And so I had contacted, I was like, what's the deal? I said, well, we just want to make sure it's you, you were seeing all this stuff coming across. And it was funny because I'd got this guy, and the guy I was talking to on the phone, he knew about model. He was familiar with model railroading. I said, well, I'm going from N scale to HO. Goes, oh, you don't have to say anymore. I know what you're doing. Oh, okay, I can sell this stuff and everything. Oh, so, good. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're drumming up some capital to move over to the HO scale stuff. Yeah. So when you start with this whole, you're changing it over. You know what your bench work is. When you start to go for a track plan, is it something that's in your head? Do you start drawing it out? How did you start to think about this track plan that you were going to put on this bench work?
Well, now the layout, of course, the current layout I'm in now is it's a house we've been in 3 years. But back when I was going in to that first HO layout, it was, I think it was, I can't remember the exact name. It was like the Atlas. It was their free track designing software. I think I can remember that.
Sure.
And so that's the approach I took. I found that, and I was able to kind of play with that with the existing bench work, and I knew what would fit and what wouldn't fit. So the way I kind of approach it, at least at that time, I knew enough about realistic operations where I wanted to keep it, the design sort of like you would see like in a real railroad. So, no switching puzzles, no crazy track work, everything like that, everything straightforward and as easy as possible, just like a real railroad would do. Because, the name of the game is actually, moving freight. And so that's kind of the approach I take. And obviously everyone's limited. You're not able to do everything you want to do. But that's kind of my approach is there's got to be some realism in it. It's got to be sort of designed like a real railroad would do, even if that means, kind of doing without. And I know a lot of modelers, they love the switching puzzles and they love, but I'm more of like, now realism is what I kind of go for. I like that realistic railroad. So that's kind of the approach I take. And then I'm also too, at least at that time, especially going through my N scale layout, is like, oh my gosh, it's like there's so much to do, and I've kind of overdone it. I also kind of the approach I do is, what railroad fits in your lifestyle and your skill level, and and I think that has really helped me, especially this current layout, and making it such a great layout, something I can have fun with and operate it. And like everyone else, you do get starry-eyed, and you're thinking, oh man, I could maybe expand this and do this and everything like that. But I really try to just maintain that discipline, and that's the approach I take in design. One of the approaches too is, okay, it's is this something that is you can do and you can finish and you can operate, and you got to think these things out, and I think that's really helped, and has kept me grounded. I mean, all of us, like I said, we kind of get excited and want to expand out. We see these basement layouts and things like that. But that's kind of one of the rules that I go by when I'm, designing something, a layout and operation is, just kind of stay grounded. And it's like, okay, here's what I can do, and here's what would be fun, and just kind of go from there.
Yeah, it's kind of like establishing, and when they, anybody tells you on any project, establish SMART goals, right? And it's kind of the same thing, make sure it's measurable, obtainable kind of stuff that you can realistically complete. Because, I'm sure there's many people who have gotten into it and done exactly that. Thought they were going to build a huge railroad empire, and then all of a sudden they run out of steam, and so you definitely want to make sure you're full aware of what your capabilities are, what your budget is. There's just a whole bunch of factors you definitely want to make sure you go into it.
It really is. And like I said, I think I kind of got lucky because while that N scale layout, the last one I did was, it wasn't basement size. So I learned the lesson before I really got in too deep. And especially I got that point, which, you hate to see happen, but I know sometimes people will actually leave the hobby because they kind of get overwhelmed, and, they think, oh, it's too much, and, we lose them. So I got lucky in that, where it was like, I kind of learned that lesson, but it was, I think it was a positive thing versus, this isn't the hobby for me, for example.
Yeah. Being able to stay encouraged throughout, and, for you to be able to change not only, roads and scales and everything else and persevere through that. So you build this first HO scale layout. Where do we bridge from here to what you have done now? What was the turning point to go from this 10 by 10 to what you're starting to build now?
Well, actually, we sold our house, and my wife and I sold our house, and this gave me, you hate the your layout coming down. It's always sad, but we're having the house I'm in now. We're having it built, and so this gave me so many opportunities. The first one was I can actually design a layout room, and so instead of just having to go in and say, well, I was a spare bedroom, I'll just use a spare bedroom. I had that option, and then also gave me time to do some actual planning. Once we had the house plans, I knew what the railroad, the room was going to be, which is actually the builder was able to put in a 15 by 17 foot room for me, and the fluorescent, plenty of fluorescent lighting and plenty of lighting, and so but the one of the things I did going from the first layout to the current one is I was able to take all this past experience from when I got back into railroading back in 2002, all the mistakes, all the good things. I was able to do research, and that's where I came up with Fort Smith, Arkansas. And so it gave me that time to put all the pieces together and and just kind of do it right. And so that's how we did that transition. So once the house was built, of course, you get settled in and everything, and it started for there. And I actually had the track plan ready to go because I knew what the room was going to look like. And so at that time, it was just the Atlas, their freeware version of the track planning software that I was using. And it went from there. So I was able, I don't know if you'd call this a dream layout, but certainly it was probably the layout that I've been wanting to do for a long time. And so that's how we made the transition. And then, of course, it's just like you spend the weekends, you put in the bench work, and this is along the walls. It's actually, I put it together in sections because that's one thing. I was able to reuse some of my bench work, but that is one thing I kind of learned in the move. It's like, if you put it in sections, you can actually reuse this, or it's easy to move and easy to kind of move it around and everything like that. And then went from there. Probably some of the things I did differently than this last layout is this was the first one where I've used the insulation foam, which is, again, one of these things you learn along the way. Mm-hmm. And you can have those land contours and things like that. And, because the world's not flat. Sure. And it just makes a huge, huge difference. Mm-hmm. I did go in some areas, a little bit just more simple in this layout. Now, like the first HO layout, I wanted to try all the bells and whistles. So I had like the under table switch machines and signaling systems and all this other kind of stuff. This one, and of course, like everyone, it's like as we get a little bit older, I'm still a pretty young guy, but crawling into the layout still is not, it leaves a lot to be desired. So this I went with, for example, like the micro engineering switches, which are, have the springs. You can manually change the turnout, so you don't have to worry about the under table switch machines. I've been there, done that. And there's no reason for this layout. There's really no reason I can reach everything, right. Obviously. And so that was kind of where it went. Took all these lessons that I learned, all the things I've read, and just put it together and just really kind of thought it out, planned it, and kind of went from there. But again, one of the things I wanted to do is, it's again, keep it as simple as possible. And the whole thing was just where I could just concentrate on, the realistic operations, and just to kind of have fun with it and not to worry about the, some of the other things that, fun to play with, but really not needed for my layouts.
Yeah. My good friend Joe Mammy would say the words less is more.
Less is more.
And, yep. I know he stole that from other people, but he uses it quite a bit. So I'll credit him for it. I want to go back to that 3. So you had some downtime. Mm-hmm. How long was that period, say, between when your HO scale layout to your house? What time period was that?
I would say, about a year, maybe year and 2 months. And it was like, because you're talking 8 or 9 months for the house to be built, you got to move in and everything like that. So
roughly a year and a half, right?
I would say about a year and a half.
So you, in that time, you did, you were talking about some of the research, and I want to touch on that because, you're talking about Fort Smith, and you kind of gave me pre-show a little bit of a geography lesson that Fort Smith is kind of away from where you live. So, but you're modeling that area. What kind of research were you doing in that year and a half time as far as with the prototype to try to learn kind of, the Fort Smith operations? And
so, a year and a half, of course, that gave me a lot of time to do the research. And, a lot of, it's like Missouri Pacific, that was like, obviously the railroad I've always wanted to model everything. And so enjoy the research, enjoy learning about the railroad, but certainly when building a layout, modeling an area, you have to do that research, and you have to learn more about it. So originally it was going to be Little Rock. That's where I grew up in. I remember, my dad, my brother went down, riding the bikes and watching the Missouri Pacific, trains run. Of course, passenger service. This is the 70s, the passenger service and everything is gone. So it's like that was like, I said, yeah, it's going to be Little Rock. So, but in my research, started learning about other areas of Arkansas. And what really changed my mind and then drove me to modeling Fort Smith. And for those that aren't familiar with the Arkansas, Fort Smith is actually in northwest Arkansas, and it borders up against Oklahoma. And it was I believe it was a small, it was a local train show, if I remember correctly. And of course, I'm, during the research and, collecting all kind of Missouri Pacific stuff. And, I've got like a drawer or two full of it, but you always need more, right? You can't get enough.
Right.
So I found this booklet this guy had, and it was a Missouri Pacific. It was basically an industry car spotting guide that was issued to the train crews in Van Buren and Fort Smith. And Van Buren is just north of Fort Smith, Arkansas. And that's Missouri Pacific has a big yard up there. They cross the Arkansas River, come down to Fort Smith. And I started looking through this thing, and I was just blown away. I never even considered Fort Smith. Over 75 industries in Fort Smith served by the Missouri Pacific Railroad. Yeah, and I was like going, well, no longer, no. This is the reason they have a car spotting guide. And basically what that is you have, a list of the industries, and it's not to scale, but it's actually a track map. And it helps these crews, kind of get around, because there was a lot of switching going on in Fort Smith. And the cool thing about that too is, remember, Fort Smith is 1982. They were absorbed into the Union Pacific, and so this railroad doesn't exist anymore, which makes it tough. There's a lot of documentation and things out there, but sometimes it's still, you're having to search for stuff. But this listed the actual names of the industries. I mean, so it's like, how cool is that? It's like, not only do I have, wow, my gosh, yeah. Now the only thing I wasn't, I'm having to continue to do research on is a lot of these companies are long gone. So I had the name, but still not quite sure what they did. But there's a ton of them that I was able to find this out, and some of them are still in operation. So I was like, there's no question, I'm going to do Fort Smith, Arkansas. And so then I started researching more on the specific industries. And one of the things that I wanted to do, and especially you have all these industries to choose from, is I said, okay, I can have 12 industries on the layout, and it could have more, but again, believe in the, I don't like things are crowded together. Just kind of, it's, you want some of that free space in there. So 12 where the layout would still look good, that'd give me plenty of switching, everything like that. So one of the things I wanted to do is, it's like, okay, at least have an industry that would give me an excuse to run a specific car. So, so the way I kind of went with these industries, narrowed them down is, okay, I've got this industry that would, normally get boxcars, but I want to run tank cars. So I'm going to put an industry on there that would actually see some tank car traffic. And of course I had my pick, So then what I was able to do is do a little bit more research and find out, on the industries that were more, maybe more interesting or really sort of known in Fort Smith. So somebody visiting the layout was familiar with Fort Smith would see that and say, oh, Fort Smith, Arkansas, there you go. But I tell you that the track spotting guide was it. I mean, that's what just, sealed the deal. And that's where I kind of, said, this is it. I'm going to go forward with it. Fort Smith, Arkansas.
Well, that would certainly accelerate your research, but it's really neat that you've, from, kind of a happy accident of finding this guide at a trade show and then kicks off even more, that challenging yet very satisfying research of looking into and learning about the railroad you're going to model. Some guys will just pick it by color or pick it by, whatever randomness or whatnot. But when you're able to pick a prototype based on, good information and kind of things that excite you about the history, and especially past. That's a challenge to try, like you said, to find all that information and make it tie in.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And of course, there's still a lot of unknowns. I mean, there's just I've gotten up to Fort Smith. Actually, my last YouTube show was I went up to Fort Smith and everything, but I actually still need to get up there and look through the archives and get some details. And a lot of models run into this when, especially railroads that are no longer with us, their fallen flags, is just surviving images of some of these industries that were out there. And a lot of them I hadn't been able to find online. I need to get back up to Fort Smith and hopefully there's an archive with an image of what the actual structure looked like. So, but partly because of that, one is just time. That's why my layout, I would call it a prototypical freelance. So the structures are representations of the industries that were served by the Missouri Pacific. And one day, retire, whatever, I got more time to do some scratch building. It is perfectly, I just certainly will, plan on going back and actually building replicas of the structure. But this is fine for me. And again, it's that representation. It still says Fort Smith, Arkansas, and it's something where a visitor to the layout would recognize it. It's close enough. So.
Would you have considered yourself a history buff before all this, or was it?
Yeah. That's probably pretty apparent. Yeah, I've always loved history, and I took a different career path. But even at one time, that was I considered doing history, but especially railroad history. I just find it fascinating, and even other railroads besides Missouri Pacific, like to read about them and study about them and things like that. To me, that's fun to me. And it really, I think, it makes me a better modeler. It kind of being more familiar with, the history of the railroad and where they came from and what they did and things like that, certainly.
Well, I certainly think it's a must-have for a prototype railroader, especially if it's not, to be able to have that passion and desire and that know-how to, know where to dive in and know where to go get this information and really know how to dig and connect the dots stuff is really a key piece of that prototype modeler.
Yeah, I think it's whether you're going prototypical all the way, or like me, if I had to put a label on myself again, I would say prototypical freelance, where it's just it's representation of an area. The research is really important. You have to do it. And you can find, it's, I know a lot of times it might seem, it's like, people hear research. Like, now I'm a model railroader, I don't want to do research and everything. But you can actually find this really, really cool stuff. It's not all facts and figures and things like that. And you kind of, it opens up so many doors. To give you an example, like when I was researching, switching up in Fort Smith, I found out that the Missouri Pacific actually ran an Illinois Central Gulf GP10 up there. And it was, I think they called it a power payback. Maybe I'm getting that wrong in the railroad terms, but it was basically, it was okay, we're going to let you borrow this locomotive for a while to pay kind of off the debt. So, hey, I like the Illinois Central Gulf. So it's like, okay, I have an excuse to run an Illinois Central Gulf locomotive. And I wouldn't have known this unless I'd gone back, did the research and said, wow, they had pictures and everything. It's like, I can't believe that they had GP10 Illinois Central Gulf. So you can find this really cool stuff. Another example is, some of these really cool industries and things like that. You learn that they were such a part of the city or the community, or they were, and they had some uniqueness and things like that about them. And so then, as far as modeling that area, it's kind of like that helps you make the decision. It's like, oh man, this is really cool. This is like a neat industry. It was, it was unique design, or it was like a really, kind of a landmark of the city and everything. And so, so all of this helps you. So again, it's, don't be afraid of doing the research. And you don't have to become, an expert at it. But I would, especially if you're getting into the prototypical operation, it goes beyond, okay, this specific locomotive, this specific car. If you're going to do it, you've also got to learn about the area that you're modeling. And that's just going to make the layout that much better. So, but again, just, you don't have to do it all at once, and you might find it fun. A lot of people didn't think they would, that research, again, that's that word, it scares people, but a lot of people start getting into it and it's like, wow, this is kind of cool. I'm learning all this stuff about it. And I really think it helped as a modeler. It just makes us better modelers, my opinion. So.
Yeah. And what I think it really is neat is that, by having a prototypical or having prototypical, whether it be prototypical scenes or your entire railroad is a prototype, mm-hmm. or whatnot, that capture of history within your layout, where you can actually teach a history lesson in HO scale right on your layout.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it's just, and I think it helps too. It's like, gets people interested in the hobby. I mean, I've had some visitors come over, and they say, oh, wow, I've seen that before. I said, yeah. And then they start getting model railroading and things like that. And they start getting interested and you actually start running the layout and things like that. So it's very positive things.
Absolutely. So you travel up to Fort Smith. Is the line still in use in Fort Smith?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting. My last YouTube show, I wanted to go up there and I thought it'd be kind of a neat idea to trace back the old line. And the history in that was the majority of what was the Missouri Pacific, and there were 3 railroads actually in operation at the time. There was the Missouri Pacific Railroad, the Kansas City Southern, and the Frisco. And the Frisco, Missouri Pacific were the big ones. And so the majority of the Missouri Pacific line that's there is now run by the Fort Smith Railroad. And when Missouri Pacific was absorbed into Union Pacific, they ran it for a while, and they spun off a local class 3 railroad, mm-hmm. Fort Smith Railroad. Of course, now the Arkansas, Missouri, and some people are familiar with the Arkansas, Missouri Railroad. They have a wonderful passenger excursion trip up in that area, and that was kind of the old Frisco line. So a lot of it is still there. A lot of the companies that were serviced by the Missouri Pacific are still serviced by the Fort Smith Railroad. Some names have changed. Others have not. As an example, the Planters Peanuts. Everyone's familiar with Planters Peanuts.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Missouri Pacific customer. It's now a Fort Smith Railroad customer. So I was really surprised at the number of industries that are still being served. Now, the majority of the ones that are gone, unfortunately, are the smaller ones that were there. For example, there's like a wheelbarrow manufacturing company, as an example. And that's gone, the track's pulled up, but you can, when I was up there, you could still see some ghosts of, remnants of the track that once ran there and things like that. So, but yeah, I was really surprised that the most of the line is still intact and still running today.
You still have some of the structures there too, as well. So you have a point of reference when you start to do this scratch building that you have planned.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. It's like I think, and I would love to do it. Like I said, really now is just the time. I'm still working full time and
sure,
have other hobbies and things like that. But absolutely, I've got one I'm doing. It's the Arkansas Coffin Company, which again was a landmark up there, and I'm working on that now. It's not going to be a scratch build, but that is on the scratch building plan. Sure. That's probably going to be one of the first ones that I'm going to do. When I actually have time to do it. So
excellent. So let's talk about now, we've done the research and whatnot, and we haven't even we've talked a little bit about your layout and, mm-hmm. But we tapped on it, but let's talk about it directly.
Sure. Absolutely.
So tell us about your layout, tell us about your track plan a little bit and what you have on there. You mentioned that you had, I think 12 industries you said on there.
Yeah, this is, the approach I took is, one, it's, from previous layouts, this layout is higher. It's mid-chest, about 54 inches high. Okay. It's a round. It goes along the walls, and it's a switching layout. And so the room is it's a 17 by 15 foot room. And so the way this is designed is it comes out no more than 2.5 feet from the wall, so I can kind of get to everything. So the way it's designed is in front of, kind of how to picture this is like when you come into the room, you have a representation of the Arkansas River Bridge. That's where the railroad crosses from Van Buren to Fort Smith. And that's actually, kind of to start there, that's actually a swings back and out of the way. So that's how you kind of get into the room.
Okay.
And then from there, it goes into the Missouri Pacific yard. They had 2 yards there, a car storage yard and a small sorting yard there. So it goes into there. And then from that point on, continues along the room and around, and you have the different industries there. Now, like I said, my approach to this is, I think it was Lance Menheim, that really, I'm kind of a big fan of his. And I think he was the one that's, along with many, that have preached sort of having that free space or that empty space. Right. So part of the design is, I have that in there where it's like the industries are spaced out, where it looks like the train's actually going somewhere. And it's not, and everything's just kind of like, clumped together on that. And by the way, it doesn't, a free area doesn't mean that just has to be an empty field. You can do things that really make this interesting. You can have these little scenes and things like that. So it crosses this bridge. And to back up a little bit, one of the things, reason I kind of designed it like this is, I'm not a big fan of the duck unders. And I knew if I had a lift out section that would get old. It's like, well, I got to put this thing somewhere and everything like that. So that's why I went with sort of like where it swings up, kind of like a door in a way.
As a big guy, I appreciate those that don't put duck unders.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. And of course, it's like, I had a moment of weakness when I was kind of designing this thing, because I was like going, how the world am I going to do this? I said, well, maybe a duck. And I was like, no. I said, don't do this. And so it's really cool, because the way I designed that is I have a bridge span. It's going to be like a bridge scene. And so it's like it's the design, like, it took a little bit of thinking to do, but it's only one span, but it's still, the way I'm going to kind of like, model it, people will still recognize it as, the bridge gaps, comes over the Arkansas River between Van Buren and Fort Smith.
Let me add in here, because I want to address this duck under thing and how wise you were, and share my own little story here. I recently went on to a layout, and that's about as far as I'll go. That way nobody can, we'll protect the innocent here.
I understand. Yeah.
So this person had a really nice layout, but what they had done is they put this really long duck under of about, I don't know, it was about 24 to 30 inches you had to duck under. It was like just real long duck under. So I was there with a couple good friends, and we're operating this layout, and the owner of the layout kept going under this duck under, and I swear, every single time this poor guy went underneath this duck under, he hit his head. So everyone's like, you hear that, boom. And by about the 5th or 6th time, I was starting to get a headache just listening to this poor guy wail his head on the bottom of the layout. So I'll tell you, anybody that's listening right now, if you're thinking about a duck under, please reconsider. You just think about it, and really look at your track plan. If you got to do one. It's very narrow, very easy to get under. Or invest in some pool noodles and put something around it so that when you whale your head, you don't knock yourself out completely. But
absolutely, or eventually, like start tearing your back up and all the other problems that come with it. Oh yeah, I just it's interesting. When kind of on this design, one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted the continuous running, because that's one thing I didn't have in my first HO layout. So I knew I was going to have that. And so, but yeah, it's and I won't say there's cases where it's like there's no other options, but there's a lot of things that you can do. Like I said, where I have the swing up, for example, or even if it's just a removable section, I would say do that versus, a duck under. Like I said, I'm not knowing, everyone's layout situation. There could be a situation to do that, but I agree. I mean, it's just, it gets old quick.
Yeah, just really think about it. But the good that
Yeah.
you were able to get away from that. So carry on because
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, in the my kids, you can make it fun. It doesn't have to be just a 2x4. Where I design is kind of like a river scene, with where you have and you can go out to my YouTube channel and you can, see an image of this. And it's actually, so it makes it interesting and fun. But anyway, yeah. So the way this is the design, kind of going back to that a little bit, and the industries and things like that. It's basically the same type of operation that Missouri Pacific did, where they would go over. They would do, sometimes there'd be an exchange of the Frisco over in the yard area. Other times it would just be, putting cars in there for storage and things like that. And then you go out, switch, the industries. And I don't do all the industries at one time. Again, it's just, you don't have to do that. I know. And sometimes I'd approach, and a lot of people say, I got 13 industries. I've switched 13 industries. No, that's not necessarily the case. Real railroad would not necessarily do that. Mm-hmm. So basically it goes around the layout. And then I have an area there where it's just a turnaround, where the last industry can, it finishes the switching, and then it comes back, and then it can either end in the yard or cross over that bridge section into Van Buren in the world off the layout. Mm-hmm. And what I've done with that is on the section of the layout, which is disappears into Van Buren. It's kind of a hidden staging area. So I've got like it'll have, don't have it in yet, but it'll be like a hill, and it'll be hidden. So it actually looks like the train is coming out of this, sort of like this hill scene, and then coming out from the real world, crosses the bridge. And then once it's all said and done, the crew's done for the day, then they go back over the bridge and it goes in, and it's a done deal. So, but it keeps you busy. One of the things I'll tell you, I try to do, on the switching, and some visitors like it, or people operate the layout, and others don't. And I try to accommodate. I'm not this person that's like, no, you have to do it this way. But
sure.
I try to add, I try to do things where it's like, to make it a little bit more realistic. I mean, it's like, switching is more than in the model railroad world. A lot of times it's like we back it up, we uncouple and away we go. So, always I add that extra time in, it's like, to unhook the cars, set the brakes, and do things like that. They have the paperwork and things like that. The crews have to do. I throw sometimes, little gotchas in there, like I think you got a hot box there. What are you going to do with that situation there? So to try to make it, extend it out a little bit, where it's just, and again, some people like that, some do. And I don't go so far because I realize, like, if you talk to train crews, it's like, man, a lot of this is not fun. It gets, and especially your layout crews, they're like, well, I don't know if I like to do this, but most of them, they kind of like that, and it adds to kind of the realism and kind of the fun and things like that too. So and you don't just, you're not done with switching in 15 minutes. I mean, you're actually like a real crew. You have to go through these procedures and things like that. So by the time it's said and done, and that's even without switching all the industries, you're looking at probably an hour, a little bit more. So to me, that's good enough time where it's like that interest hasn't died down.
Right.
It's still fun, but you're kind of ending it before things just sort of get mundane and everything like that. So.
Well, I think you've hit on it. Like, I know personally, I have a smaller switching layout, and one of the concerns always is, I was always worried about, the guys will show up here at 7, and by 7:15 everything will be done, and then what do we do after that? We're gonna have to drink beer and watch a football game or something, right? So no, it does, and that little bit of paperwork or the slowdown, and I know there's apps out there as well where you can kind of click the buttons and go through the hooking the hose up, and those. It helps. It keeps that. It slows it down enough to make the operating session last.
It really does. And I think you kind of, especially, a lot of modelers, I think, they don't, they know kind of how it works in real railroads, but, until you kind of put it in practice, it's not fully understood, and it kind of opens up some things. Well, like I said, you kind of have to gauge it too, because, you certainly don't want to, I mean, you want people to enjoy it. So the kind of the way I approach that, Ray, is just sort of a, kind of gauge on, how far to go. So somebody is just not really, I don't know. I don't want to sit here and let the air charge up for, that's okay. We don't have to do that. Or if you just want to come in, man, just want to switch cars, no paperwork, that's okay too.
Yeah.
So I try to do that. So you kind of that balance, I think. Me, I love it. I love, the paperwork and everything like that. But again, the main thing is fun. And so
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. In the end, we are playing with toy trains, and you got to keep that in mind. But as far as it's kind of that balance too, because boy, you've done so much research and you know so much about the line that you're operating on and modeling. You as an operator, as a layout owner, want to see this thing operated the right way too. So it's kind of that balance. Yeah. So how often do you get to operate your layout?
I would say, it's weekends are sort of, at least, a couple of times on the weekend. Sometimes during the weekday, it's sort of it's a working full time, of course. It's a balance between, running the layout, maybe working on a structure or doing something else. So I try to keep it, to where I can at least operate it, once a week, if not twice a week. And most of the time is on weekends and things like that. And a lot of times, just watching the trains run. I just like to power it up and just kind of watch it run, which is the reason, I just have that continuous design, for that everything. So, but it's, I start going into withdrawal symptoms if it's more than a week. I start feeling
sure.
it. It's like, yeah.
Now, as far as sessions, if you have people over, how often do you able to get that where you have maybe a group come over and run it?
Really about once a month. And it's not really, I guess I could be classified as a lone wolf. These are not really organized operating sessions. I've got one buddy who's, pretty dedicated. We go back and forth. He lives about 5 miles away. And so we run each other's layouts and stuff like that. And then, of course, COVID was a little bit of a dampener, but, now it's starting to get back now where, wanting to get some of the group together. It was before all that happened, there was actually sort of a round robin group, and we go and do different layouts and things like that. And so more of them are starting to become active again. I want to get more of them over and things like that. And so, I would say probably at least once a month, at least have one person over to run it, but I certainly want to kind of get back into that routine and everything like that. So, I don't think I would, it'll never be like it would have in like a basement size layout, where like, so this would really, I could accommodate, 2 crews, 4 people with me kind of managing everything more so. And I'm still trying to kind of come up with a good way. Like if we start having like the, more people come over is how to do that, it's like how to rotate that out and keep it fun and things like that. Maybe have some train videos or something, playing in the room, outside the train room, and then kind of like, have the crews run it to a certain area and then have the other crews come back. So still trying to figure that one out, I think. So.
Yeah, it's definitely something, a learning curve to try to figure out the operations and how do you get to keep everybody entertained. But what you find is, and maybe I hope you can echo this sentiment, that guys are just happy to come over, and gals.
They are.
Whoever is coming over
absolutely.
is just happy to be there and be around the layout. No, well, there's the pun there, but again, to be able to be in that camaraderie around, where you're running trains, and sometimes you don't get to run a train, but that's the real railroad too. There's a lot of waiting. There's a lot of, those kinds of things too. So hopefully,
yeah. And I mean, I agree with that totally. It's, and it's a lot of, of course, we've all been in those operating sessions and things like that. We just have the guy kind of wants to hang out, and watch the trains run, things like that. And they catch up with old friends and things like that. And so that's all part of it. I think it's sort of, we call it running the trains or, the operating session, but really it's just a good time to kind of get together. And if, not do anything else, just kind of, hey, how have things been going? I hadn't seen you in a while. It's just kind of just kind of that camaraderie and things like that. That's all part of it. And I tell you, and it's like, I think that's another reason why I just, such a big fan of the switching layouts and things is, And I mean, again, I love the big basement layouts, and I've run, like operating sessions on those. But I think switching layouts, and at least my opinion, I think you have more of an opportunity for that camaraderie and things like that, because you're not so busy. Where like a lot of these big layouts, it's kind of like a job. You really don't, once things start moving, you don't have time to kind of visit. I mean, you're in your, area, you're doing this job and things like that. And I mean, that's all you're doing, and which is fun. I mean, I enjoy it, but I think if, choosing between the two, I think just having that camaraderie and people come over and making those connections and things like that. I think that's kind of like, that's my preference, versus just, okay, you're in section A, and you don't talk, you don't anything, you're just running trains and that's it. So just my opinion, but I think switching layouts, that's one thing they offer that the big, huge basement layouts don't. Just Absolutely. My opinion.
So another way you're reaching out, and I want to make sure we mention this, is so you've started yourself a YouTube channel.
Yes.
And you've got some videos on there. You've got some some layout tour stuff on there, and then you've done some tips and techniques. What was your motivator to start doing some YouTube videos?
Yeah, well, I think it's like anything. The pandemic, we're kind of stuck, and so we're trying to find things to do. And I've always enjoyed sharing the hobby of model railroading trains. As a matter of fact, I always tell model railroaders is, we all need to become, we need to be model railroad ambassadors. We need to share the hobby. We need to talk about the hobby. We need to, get people interested in the hobby. Because I don't think it's, it's a situation where it's like, there's no interest up there and a hobby's dying or anything like that. I mean, the hobby's changed. I just think it's kind of getting the word out there. And so I think it's kind of a responsibility to do that. So during the pandemic, you're trying to find things to do. You're working from home, and of course your layouts, that's keeping you busy, but you got to do some things. And so it's like, it's like, I'd be kind of fun. And of course, I think a lot of it goes back to what I call my first real job back in the early 90s. I was actually assistant producer for a small cable company. We do commercials and things like that. And I think the love just kind of stuck, the interest kind of stuck. Of course, now YouTube, I said, I think it'd be kind of fun. So I think I started out where one of the first videos I had was just like a GP7 running on the track. It was like a couple of minutes or something. And then, so it's like, I think it'd be kind of fun to kind of actually do a how-to video show. And so it kind of grew from there. And it's really just become this, I think I'm up to 500 some subscribers now. It's really kind of grown. But it wouldn't make any difference to me if it was only 8 subscribers. I just love doing it. I love the sharing and things like that. And so it grew from there. It kind of grew from that, just maybe a 5-minute video of you seeing this locomotive run, to more of a professional show, where you have the opening and you show what you've done in your layout, and you have tips and things like that. And then, of course, started doing the how-to videos too, because, that's one of the things that I find very helpful, is going there on YouTube and seeing how these things are done. And so it's like, a lot of these model railroading skills and the things, just the things that I can do now. I'm at that stage where it's like, okay, I'm good enough where I can actually share this. I can be the person to show somebody how to do this and kind of bring them along. And it is a balance. Like I said, with time, my biggest thing is, especially the how-to videos, it's to do it right. It does take a little bit longer. So I don't quite have as many out there as I'd like to, but we're kind of, we're getting there. But at least try to do a monthly layout update, show on YouTube. And just kind of keep, people interested in things like that. And I tell you, and the cool thing about it too, and is you've probably seen with this podcast, is all the connections and friends and things you make, and you realize that model railroading is not dying. Model railroading is alive and well. It's just the way we communicate and the way we do things is just different. So it's like having this show. I've met so many, people and now have, new friendships and things like that, obviously not some where you could just like go drive and say hi, but still, you have that connection, that community, and that, that's certainly enjoyable. But yeah, it's, like I said, it's just become fun. So, we keep going. And like I said, I've got, I think 3 or 4 of the how-tos out there. I'm hoping to have more, pretty soon. But again, it's like anything, it's just time or whatever. But yeah, that's become, I guess, almost a second hobby, I guess
Right.
you'd call it. So yeah.
Oh yeah, there's definitely that. I know that like here with the podcast, there's the podcast and then the layout. And I think maybe the layout suffers because of the podcast a little bit, but nonetheless, I enjoy that. And I think one of the things, whether it be a podcast or YouTube videos on model railroading or books or any of that, that first, piece when you first start to get into it, then you realize what resources are, especially in the modern technology era of where social media and YouTube videos and podcasts and meets now, we're back to being able to meet, whether it be a prototype modelers meet or a train show or whatnot.
Right.
Is that the first piece is that we all want to be connected and we all want to feel like we belong. And when you start to see that, you're like, there's somebody just like me out there.
Yeah.
There's somebody that, thinks like I do, and maybe in that, what you may feel is a little bit different way or whatnot. And when you find that person who's like you and can understand what you're saying and your passions and desires in the model railroading hobby, that's the first piece of connecting. So your videos and podcasts and everything are all part of that really big thing. And whether, my good friend Lionel Strang is right in saying that the hobby is exploding, or perhaps it's just the overall exposure that's there now. That's really, it's been there all along. We can see it now because we have all the tools to be able to do that. Guys like you are putting up podcasts, YouTube videos, or doing podcasts, we're doing all those things.
Yeah. I think, it's, it just opens up to, it shows you how big the model railroading world really is. And it's just so many opportunities because now you can connect to, not only people in the local community, but just all over the world that just do model railroading. And, and certainly it's in these connections and these, with this technology certainly surprised me. I mean, I thought, I knew there were people loved the Missouri Pacific and it was, they liked the railroad and everything like that, but I didn't think there was as many Missouri Pacific modelers as there were before, started making these, connections, through, technology like YouTube and Facebook and these podcasts and just things like that. So again, it opens up so many things. And again, it shows a hobby is doing just fine and is actually growing. It's just changed. It's just the way we communicate and the way we do this. And while, maybe locally, you might have less model in areas, maybe less modelers in an area you did maybe 20, 30 years ago. Certainly it doesn't mean, that they're not out there. It's just, it's just maybe a little bit more spread out. But again, this technology, allows us to connect with these people and things like that. Kind of makes it just a, really good close knit community. So again, I encourage people that, and sometimes we all see this where, you have modelers just aren't interested in that side of it, or they're, well, it's just not like today's odd. Well, and understanding it is different, but you have to be open to using this, and it's it's not a scary thing. And that's one thing I do is I try to encourage people, that hey, it's like I know you're not a big social media fan. I know you're not doing this, but I promise you, if you give it a shot, if you try it, you're going to see that the hobby is still doing very well. You're going to make all these connections. You're going to like it. And most of the ones that I've actually talked into doing it, they're like going, oh, wow, you're not, I hooked up with this Facebook group. Wow, it's like, yeah, I told you. It's kind of like, it's just, again, it's just it's changed a little bit how we communicate, how we connect to other hobbyists. That part of it is changed, but it's still alive and well. But you have to embrace this new technology, and you have to embrace how the world's changed a little bit.
Absolutely. And I for one, think we're living in a great era of model railroading. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, hey, when a guy from Eastern Connecticut can connect with a guy just outside of Little Rock, Arkansas, and talk about the Missouri Pacific, we're living in a fantastic era where we're able to connect and meet new people and share new ideas and really motivate each other to keep going in the hobby. It's definitely a fantastic thing. So if somebody, those listening, to get to your YouTube channel, how do we get there?
Yeah, I'm still waiting for that. At some point, YouTube is, I think you get so many subscribers, they give you that official link, but probably, at least now, probably the best way to find is go to YouTube, and you can do a search on Joe Musgrove or Joseph Musgrove, Missouri Pacific. And it'll pull it up. It's like, there's a Joe Musgrove, a baseball player out there. That's not me.
That's not you, huh? No.
That's not me. There's also, if you go, there's different sites out there. Like you can go to like Model Railroad Hobbyist, for example, and they have like a linking of the different users and YouTube channels and things like that.
And we'll also make it nice and easy. We're going to put your link right in our show notes so that you can check it out there. But if you're listening, just dive into the show notes. We'll get you a link over to Joe's YouTube channel. It's definitely worth checking out. He's got a lot of great videos, a lot of how-to, and some on his layout as well. You'll definitely want to check that all out. So, Joe, I want to wrap it up here. Sure. Thank you very much for joining us here on Around the Layout. It has been fantastic to hear about your Missouri-specific layout. I'm looking forward to having you back on the show, giving us more updates, and we'll talk about more about your YouTube channel as you add more videos. There's some good ones coming up. I know you're going to talk about that ghosting sign on that brick building that you're putting together. So,
yep, that's actually a how-to video that's out there right now. You can go out, take a look how I did that. So.
Excellent. Looking forward to checking that video out and a whole bunch more. Again, Joe, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Ray.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. You'll find more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Learn more about the show and check out past and future episodes on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks again for hanging out with us around the layout.